Here goes nothing.
Here goes nothing. All right. Welcome, everyone. Luke and I are going to tackle another one of George MacDonald's essays slash sermon. This one is a sermon, actually. It's listed as a sermon. And it's based on it's called Faith, the Proof of the Unseen by George MacDonald.
Mm-hmm.
It was preached in Brixton Congregational Church it says last Sunday morning, June 1882.
Do you know if this was included in his unspoken
I don't
sermons?
know. No, it's not. He's got one on faith in the unspoken sermons called The Higher Faith. So,
Gotcha.
and he always starts out with a verse and then he kind of rolls out from there, and his verse is, the great one. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Matthew.
So, I think what we'll do. So Luke and I have read it through. Luke's read it through twice, so he's one up on me. and yeah, we're shooting from the hip because that's how we like to roll.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, I mean, it's rather long to read the whole thing, but
Sure.
maybe I put a link in the description if anybody's interested of the essay or the sermon. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just read. I don't know. Let me see here. I'll read
That
a few
first paragraph or a couple paragraphs in.
I'll read down to then that is attended by thousands and thousands of other works, something like that.
Okay.
I'll read down to there. We'll discuss.
If we can make it that far.
Yeah. And if we're feeling up for it, we might throw in a link, and then others can join if
Sure.
we have any. But we'll give them something to think about. How about that? Okay, I got to clean my glasses. You know what I did today?
I'd love to hear it.
I took down my Christmas tree.
Wow.
It's just been so crazy around here. Yeah. Anyway, I could go into a long explanation as to why, but there's really no excuse, so I won't.
My
Anyway, it's gone now, finally.
Yeah.
It was looking a little peaked.
Yeah. Mine was like a rat's nest of lights. I did lights all by myself this year, and I think it was only a 6-foot tree, but I think I used at least 6 strands of lights in it. So it was intricate. It was like really deep in there. But every year I get more involved with the lighting process because I want every branch, and I want it to be deep in there. And I don't know. I really like a well-lit tree. When people just like wrap one strand around all the way to the top, I'm like,
You're preaching to the choir. I think we had 600 lights on our tree.
oh my God. This is how tall was this tree, Sherry?
Oh, it's tall. It was tall, but like we have a sloped roof, and so we always put the tree at the highest point. It's really high, and I mean, it wasn't to the ceiling by any means, and it was funny because my daughter-in-law came, my son and his wife and their little guy, and she kind of sees me as this, natural type woman who, and so she's very, delicately putting these really nice decorations that I have on the tree, and I'm like, wait, you forgot about Santa with the parachute. She's like, no, we're putting that on. I'm like, we're putting it all on, man, all of it.
Do you put a pickle on your tree?
No, but I have a mushroom.
There you go.
I bought him the one year that people were talking about Christmas and psychedelics and the
Yeah.
And I found him in some store somewhere. I'm like, I got to have this for my tree. Anyway, okay, let's go.
Let's do it.
All right. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I read it to you as it is down here, but as it stands, it never conveyed any idea to my mind at all. And I'm very glad it is altered in the Revised Version, for of all things, if we are Christians, having the least claim to the name, it is with the Spirit and not the letter that we have to do. And this translation has neither the letter nor spirit. Happy ought the man to be who finds the ark things in the dear book cleared up for. I don't know what he's talking about there. Sometimes I think they miss some words. So I'm gonna say who finds in the ark things in the dear book cleared up for him. To find that what had been as a pebble under his feet was a nut with a kernel in it, a life in it, a power of growth planted within his spirit. The true heart goes to the blessed book, not as an idolater, but as a disciple, not to worship the book, but to learn the will of him who made the book, and that has made his spirit to understand the book. But I am going to talk to you this morning about the faith that is here spoken of. We have been talking about faith ever since the Lord came. It is not exhausted yet, and God forbid that I should know yet what faith is, although I know a little what it is. I think the meaning of the phrase is this: faith is the foundation, the root, the underlying substance of hope. If you have any hope, it comes from some faith in you. Hope, you may say, is a bud upon the plant of faith, a bud from the root of faith. The flower is joy and peace. Now, the evidence of things not seen, I cannot, as I say, find any meaning in that at all. But the true meaning is the most profound fact in human history. It is the trial or the proving of things not seen. Mm-hmm. Now, upon that turns the life of every man, especially perhaps in the present day. This thing of faith means the whole recognized fellowship of man to God and his fellows. It is the right position of the human soul, which is made to understand the truth, the right position of that soul towards the truth. That is faith, partly. But you must remember that whenever you begin to speak of anything true, divine, heavenly, beyond the human, you cannot speak of it at all without speaking in some measure wrongly about it. We have no words. We have no phrases. We have no possible combination of sentences. Nay, we have no forms of intellect that do more than represent fragmentarily the greatness of the things that belongs to the very vital being of our nature. Much, much foolish talk has been uttered about faith. Oh, this talking, friends. I would not trouble myself to set your opinions all right from this moment, henceforth and forever. I would not get up into the pulpit and do so. I do not think it is worth any man's labor. But if I could stir up a single soul, instead of talking about the meaning, even of the greatest things, to go and do the smallest duty, I should say that this is the kind of duty for which Christ spent himself. If you read his life wisely, you will see that his constant effort is to turn a man's thought back to himself and make him do a thing and not talk about it. About faith, they often used to say that it was antithetically opposed to works. There never was greater nonsense. They would say that Paul taught faith and St. James taught works. And indeed, one would feel something like this sometimes, that St. Paul had gone too far and that St. James had to write that epistle to set him right. It is not any of us, friends, that will find St. Paul or St. James wrong, nor was there the smallest difference between them. On the contrary, I assert that faith is simply the greatest work that man can do. Taking it in its simplest original development, it is the highest effort of the whole human intellect, imagination, will in the highest direction. Never does the human nature put forth itself in such power, with such effort, with such energy, as to have faith in God. I say it is the highest, and sometimes the most difficult work that a man can do. All right, so we've read till there.
Yeah.
Looks like people are having their own conversation in there. I'll just leave that. Good evening, Orthodox Boomer Grandma and Lance and anybody else who's watching.
Yeah, welcome everybody.
Okay, so what do you think, Luke?
Oh man, where do we start?
Give me a favorite. Give me a favorite line in what I read.
I'm going to start with the first line, just simply because I didn't understand whether or not George MacDonald ever actually preached like these sermons, but you can almost imagine him up at the pulpit.
He did preach this one.
Okay, this
Yeah.
as you okay, Brixton Congregational Church, yeah. So he's like, as I see it written down here, so you can imagine him like up at a pulpit or something, like
Yeah.
looking down.
Could you imagine being there?
Yeah. And I love how he just like confesses immediately, like, this has never conveyed any idea to my mind at all, which is I resonate with, because you
Yeah.
read that scripture, Hebrews chapter 1, 11, and for me, I could read that 100 times and I still don't know exactly what that means, you know? But then later he helps us by not changing the definition, but what does he say? He talks about, he goes, okay, now I'm going to skip ahead, Sherry, and we can go back. But
Yeah.
he goes, now the evidence of things not seen, I cannot, as I say, find any meaning in it at all. So he's reiterating what he says in the first sentence
I
too.
love it.
And then he goes, but the true meaning is the most profound fact in human history. It is the trial or the proving of things not seen.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, he goes on to defend faith as actually doing. Or this idea, which we could get into, which is the whole faith as works, as opposed to faith as I don't know, what can faith be apart from works? That's his whole point. But
that's his whole point.
Yeah.
I loved when he talked about the text as something that is actually living. Like, I had a conversation with Wayne recently, and Wayne made that point, and he's going to elaborate on that in his series, which I'm really looking forward to, actually. That the word is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a conversation too with another guy, the one before mine, where his name, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's Atans, Atanas or Atanas.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Bulgarian guy. And he said, never in the scriptures is the text called the word. It's called that which is written, right? And the word is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So when George MacDonald says, the true heart goes to the blessed book, not as an idolater, but as a disciple. Mm-hmm. He's saying the same thing, because who did the disciples follow?
Jesus. Yeah.
The man, right? And so I liked that. I also liked what he said when he tried to explain faith. He said, faith is the foundation, the root, the underlying substance of hope. Yeah. If you have any hope, it comes from some faith in you. And then he gives this beautiful organic, and you're in the middle of it all there with your grow lights and all your seedlings.
Yeah, no kidding. Like, that's, I was thinking about that, because he's got that living metaphor of what's occurring with the seed, obviously, and it sets down its root Well, what emerges from a seed first? Is it a root or is it the cotyledons that come up and like emerge from the soil?
Root root first.
Root first goes down,
Yeah.
and then the cotyledons emerge, and you don't get a true leaf until later on, and then a bud comes after the true leaves, and so then it's, um, yeah, and then obviously the fruit, which he calls joy and peace, which I really
Love.
enjoyed. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
He also alludes to that when he says, to find that what had been a pebble under his feet was a nut with a kernel in it. He's talking about a seed. Okay.
yeah,
Like, so you know how,
a
I
life.
don't know, like I literally walk around with rubber boots with holes in them. Like, don't ask me why, but I'm just cheap. And every now and then I get a stone in my boot, right? And I'm like, have to stop and get it out because it's really annoying. And it can be the tiniest little thing.
Mhm.
And so, like he's saying here, this verse could be that, right? It could be this pebble in your shoe that just annoys the heck out of you. But
Yeah,
then you pull it out and you find out that it's actually a little acorn, right? With a kernel in it. And
kinda
so
like
it's gonna so he's giving us the sense that whatever this is, it's going to grow of its own accord. Okay. And then this always goes back to his imagination essay when he talks about the the form already contains the meaning, right? So, like, this is the example that the church fathers use when they talk about the acorn containing the mighty oak. Like, it's all there in
Mhm.
the acorn, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
man, which is, I don't know if I should bring this in, but I'm
Go for
thinking about, like, so what I imagine with a seed too is there is no, okay, there's no contact with, like, light does not necessarily contact the seed, right? In the sense that
no.
I'm thinking about it. So, like, there's something already innate
Yeah,
within the seed
yeah.
that gives it enough energy, which is, it's from the light, but it's a stored power within that seed to allow that seed to emerge, you know?
To find the light.
Yeah, to find the light. So it's like there's already something in
Continue
there.
the process.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
and he's gonna talk about light.
yeah, he does.
Yeah, like, he's going there, right, Luke?
Yeah.
And you're already onto the breadcrumbs because this is his analogy is the analogy of a plant, right?
Mhm.
And, so yeah, okay, let me see if there's something else, and then maybe we should just keep reading, because 'cause we're gonna
Well,
it's hard to talk about it all when we haven't read the whole thing.
yeah. Um, how did you okay, so I do have another thought, and it's
Okay, yeah,
the
do it,
end of the
yeah.
larger paragraph, which he says, um, oh man, where does he go? On the contrary, I assert that faith is simply the greatest work a man can do.
Mhm.
Taking it in its simplest, original development, it is the highest effort of the whole human intellect, imagination, will, in the highest direction. That is all of human cognition.
Yeah,
That is that's all. There's nothing
that's it,
else.
that's it,
You know?
that's
So,
it.
never does the human nature put forth itself in such power, such effort, and such energy as to have faith in God, and I say it is the highest and sometimes the most difficult work a man can do. And what I did have intimations of too was, uh, like, my first thought was when Jordan Peterson, uh, way back, when he talked about the resurrection and how, like, he didn't know what was possible. When,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
a human aimed itself and oriented itself towards the good, the beautiful, and the true, which I don't even know if those were the words he used at the time. I'm ad-libbing now,
Well,
but
the thing that's most high is usually
yeah,
what he how he describes it.
which I would, yeah. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you orient yourself in the right direction and what's possible. Well, who knows? Possibly resurrection is possible. So it's like this idea that um what opens up to us through faith when we have in accord the intellect, imagination, and the will.
Mm.
Like, I don't know, there's a lot there.
Well, I'm going back to the very beginning now, because he says here in the very beginning, he's talking about orientation here.
Yeah.
Now, upon that turns the life of every man, especially perhaps in the present day. This thing of faith means the whole recognized fellowship of man to God and his fellows. And his there is capitalized. So God's fellows. It is the right position of the human soul, which is made to understand the truth, the right position of that soul towards the truth. That is faith, partly, he says. So it's like, when I read that, it's an orientation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that also leans towards his analogy of a plant, because that's what plants do. They orient themselves to the sun, right?
He's working with multiple layers of interpretation, because when he's talking about truth, he's talking about light. And
Right.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
The highest direction.
Yeah. And I also like that he defends Paul and James as, like, first of all, he puts people in their place when he says, some might say that St. Paul had gone too far and St. James had to write that epistle to set him right. It is not any of us that will find St. Paul or St. James wrong. Right.
Yeah.
So, like, don't project your shit into that scenario, right?
The only result is you're gonna juxtapose these two guys and put them at cross purposes or something like
With
that.
each other.
Is what we do. That's
Oh, they must be fighting.
Differentiate these two
because of Twitter. Because that's what happens on Twitter.
Yeah. Instead of trying to see how those two things, like how you could syncretize what Paul's saying. And honestly, I admit that I didn't go back and read James or what Paul was saying, obviously Hebrews here, but I wonder if going back to those passages and reading them again would be a good idea.
Well, honestly, when I read that, I was familiar with the argument.
Yeah.
That exact argument that, Paul had gone too far, so James had to correct him, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to just read some more then. How about that? Okay, so he ends with, faith is the most difficult work that a man can do. Mm-hmm. Then that is attended by thousands and thousands of other works of faith. In the present state of England's history, and we may add that of several other countries to it, it seems as if it were more difficult to believe than ever it was before. It seems also, I may say it seems also to many people, and some people in certain moods, as if there was less faith in the world than there ever was before. And when they look in their own hearts, even those who would fain rank themselves among believers, they recognize there is an amount of doubt, difficulty, and fear that appalls themselves. What? Is this whole thing going to vanish like the baseless fabric of a vision? All this story of Christ, his life and death, and the conquests that were made in his name, is it all going out of sight? And are we to be left where the world was before he came? I should like to help some of you, if I can, friends, about all of this. It troubles some of your hearts, and some of you, perhaps, ought to be a little more troubled about it than you are. I love this guy. because it lies at your door in some measure. I think that that's a reference to evil crouching at the door. Was that Cain? When God says that to Cain, that
Yeah.
that that evil is crouching at your door.
No, and I immediately went to Passover and the blood of the lamb
Right, right,
flying over the door. I don't know.
right. It troubles some of your hearts, and some of you perhaps ought to be a little more troubled about it than you are, because it lies at your door in some measure. But I should like if, on the minds of young men particularly, although there is a sad enough ground for including young women too, if I could impress upon them that let the thing look to them as it may. It is a notion and a false idea of Christianity that has come into their minds, partly because their own doors were opened narrow, partly because their own aspirations were so low, partly because they have been so little in earnest for the truth. It is about to vanish away and must perish. But the true thing, God's notion of it, what Christ thought and felt while he was here, what he thinks and feels now when he is here still, is that which shall never pass away, but is the true fountain of truth and life to all the generations. But first of all, let me say a word to the man or woman who is troubled with the difficulty of believing. Nowadays, there is such a talk about science and such a contempt poured forth on the man who thinks to walk without that kind of science for the guide of his life, who has a different goal, a different ambition, whose thoughts stretch further than the things of this life, the things he sees and hears and handles. If there be such a man among us, friends, who does the work of the world and does it well, but his head is in heaven, that is the kind of thing we ought all to be and to seek. And there are perhaps a few even now of this kind, and there are more growing. But let me say to you about your own fears and doubts and difficulties, it is a great thing to believe. Are you fit to believe?
Shoot.
I have just said that I believe it to be the loftiest exercise of the human being and of human nature. How can you expect to believe? Are you like Nathanael, an Israelite indeed, a man without guile? What are your ways? What have you been about? What are your desires in life? How have you been ordering yourself? If it may be that although the power of God upon you makes you feel that you ought to believe, that you are such that you cannot believe, and it is your own fault. Fully do I recognize the difficulty. I question if there is a doubt or a sense of difficulty that prevails now that has not passed through my own mind as a thing to be encountered and understood and settled. It is natural that we should doubt, with such cries, especially on all sides of us, and the intellect so much more awake than ever it was before, and indeed the conscience not more asleep than before, and with one on this side and one on that side crying out, I have reached, I have seen, and I have found no God. Settle this with yourselves to begin with. Not all the intellect or metaphysics of the world could prove that there is no God. And not all the intellect in the world could prove that there is a God. If you could prove that there is a God, that would imply that you could go all around him and buttress up his being with your human argument that he should exist. As soon might a child on his mother's bosom, looking up into his mother's face, write a treatise on what a woman was and what a mother was.
Hmm.
And I'm going to just read not the whole next paragraph, but I just want to read the beginning because he says, but do not think that God is angry with you because you find it hard to believe.
Hmm.
It is not so. That is not like God. God is all that you can honestly wish him to be, and infinitely more. He is not angry with you for that.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
Gentle George.
Gentle George. Yeah. Oh, Wayne's here too.
Good.
Should I put a link in?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's a lot of people in the chat, so
Okay,
You wanna
I'm
tell me?
gonna put a link in here. And there we go. So if anybody wants to join, please join. All right, thoughts?
Do
I
you
thought it sounded very contemporary when he talked about young men particularly, and then he said something like, "And there's sad enough ground for including young women too."
Yeah,
Like, I'm like, things haven't changed much.
no. I like them talking about, where I'm trying to find it in the paragraph, I'm looking back, but he
Yeah.
talks about the man who, um, just simply proceeds with the smallest of simplest acts or something like that, like the
Right.
most
And it
basic act of proceeding
Mhm.
rather than e which I guess this echoes back to something later on in the essay, which I don't wanna spoil alert the rest of the essay or the sermon, but just that movement into action, which, uh, even if it be the most mundane of actions, it's a movement of faith, and, I think that harkens back to him saying that the most profound fact in human history is that faith is it is in the trial and the proving of things not seen. So it's in the actual it's in the trying.
Mhm.
It's not in the talking. Um, but maybe I'm getting
You
ahead of
know, because I had just had that conversation with Wayne, some things were fresh in my mind when I was reading this, and I was thinking about, um I think you watched it, right? Did you watch the
Oh,
conversation?
yeah, I loved it. It was great.
Okay. So I talked about how I had kinda made a deal with God about, I'll prepare myself and you give me a husband,
Mm,
right? And and that was actually a moment in my life where I felt like I was completely living by faith. Like I everything I did was oriented towards that. um I was doing the proving thing, right? I was saying, "Okay, I believe it. You're gonna do it. I prayed about it. I know you're good to me, and so now I'll prepare, and then you do your work." And I had no idea how long it would take,
yeah.
right? Like it could have been years, and and it really it became my whole life. And it was not like I was just like, "Oh, I'm so excited. I'm gonna have a like I wasn't delusional.
Yeah.
But it was like everything that I did in faith
Yeah.
that, that and I was thinking about later, like, you could translate that into just your everyday life as a Christian. Um, and I want to avoid really simplistic language here because people make this mistake, and I think it's a tragic one, to emulate Christ, right? Um, and nobody ever understands why I say that, but I think they end up like the rich young ruler who says to Jesus, I want to be good. And Jesus said, "You're being good.
Mm,
You're good." And then he goes, "No, but I want to be better." Right? And
yeah.
so we get ourselves caught up in this thing, right? Where we're like, we're not we just aren't good enough, right? In our estimation. And we forget about the fact that we're actually just a little a kernel, right?
Mhm.
And we got to put up those leaves and we got to, you know,
Yeah.
um so what am I trying to say?
I'm curious, and I know there's not everybody's listened to that conversation with Wayne, but what was the initial prompting? Like, I know that you had your daughter and you were in you were kind of alone in that situation, and to have someone to come through and help you like that. I guess I'm trying to figure out
The prompting for that
the
for that
prompting for that.
that for that conversation with God?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was like the dark night of the soul that's what it was.
Yeah.
It was me laying in my bed, bawling my eyes out.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It wasn't as pretty as it sounded in the conversation with Wayne. But, let's not go there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
No, seriously, like snot all over my face, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And just like feeling completely in Swiss, they say "ausgeliefert." It means delivered out to something, like delivered up, like just thrown out on the
Wow.
street kind
Yeah.
of thing, right? Like that's how I felt. And so it was like, I wasn't actually in the beginning. I wasn't saying I need a husband. I wasn't like, okay,
Sure.
look, here's my list of things, and one of them is a husband. I was just, I can't do this by myself. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm so lonely. I'm so alone,
Mm.
right? So that's where it came from.
Yeah, and in your movement into obedience is like, because that is huge for George, which we'll get into,
Mhm.
is is obedience. And like, are you doing what are you doing what God has told you to do
Right.
now? And I will preface that by saying I don't think that is doing your devotions, or you know what I'm trying to say,
No,
or
exactly.
saying
No, he's
prayers, or
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I
I'm
mean, I think it comes down I think it's further down in here, but that really impressed me too because I've said that too, like, it's one foot in front of the other, like, it's what God has put before you,
yeah,
right? It's not like this is why I don't like saying emulate Christ, because some people think that's what they're supposed to do,
sure.
and
Yeah.
that's not the doing that needs doing. The doing that needs doing is what's in front of you.
Mhm.
It's what's yours to do.
Yeah. 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 No, I
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. So there
Yeah.
is this like unique way in which I think, and this is language that I sometimes avoid because it gets contentious, but like there's a way in which God's speaking to you through your conscience to move and act in a certain direction, perhaps. And maybe it's,
And sometimes it seems crazy.
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it's really weird.
Yeah.
and 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 it's
And
unique.
he talks about that in here.
Yeah, it's unique to you,
Mhm.
and it might seem wild to a lot of other people, or what have you, but it's like that, like, there's a simple movement of like, okay, like, this is the testing ground. This is the proving ground. This is the test of your faith. Are you doing that unique thing that God's calling you to do? And I think that does draw up the question of like, okay, well, how do I identify what God's actually calling me to do? But George is explicit again and again throughout this whole essay, and I don't even think we've gotten to it yet, but he continually harkens back to your conscience
Mhm.
being the guide,
Right.
which how the Holy Spirit interacts with your conscience is a whole nother conversation we can have. But that's but also that conscience is there from before the foundation of the earth. Like you are God's child. It's not something you have to like do a certain, you don't have to, I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's no set of practices that you can do to cultivate your conscience. Your conscience is given to you.
Right.
It is your integrity. It is when you've talked about your integrity in the past with the Job series and stuff like that. That's what I that's what I would hearken to as your
Exactly.
conscience. So
Yeah. Yeah. You know, while you were talking about that, I was thinking, okay, so after this verse comes the hall of faith, right? The famous hall of faith with all the men of faith. And you know, he goes he goes right into Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, right? Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses. I mean, if you think about these guys, everything that they did was outside. It was out of the box thinking,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we don't even
It's
know. We actually don't even really know what it was about Enoch. This is what I love about Enoch. I just love Enoch. You know, it's just like all of a sudden gone. You know, and I'm just like, what did he, you know?
Yeah.
I
Who's
w I would love to meet him, you know? But to me, it feels like each one of those people did the thing that their conscience told them to do,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
with, you know, Abel's sacrifice, Noah, I mean,
Yeah.
he was a crazy man.
And they did it
He
whether
was a
or not,
crazy man.
and they
Yeah,
did it just like Job, whether or not it was feast or famine, whether or not they
mhm,
were rewarded
yeah,
or blessed by their.
or approved,
Yeah.
or they did it actually in the face of, um, what is it? What's the word? In the face of not resistance, but, you
Action.
know, anyway. Um, so it's like they you know, they weren't able to just they didn't have a group of people that were like, "Yeah, we got your back."
Mhm.
I mean, Abel died. He got killed for it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. And that yeah.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I think about Abraham a lot in this context because, you know, he's in his father's workshop making idols, right? On a lathe. I can just imagine him, you know, just working away. All of a sudden, he hears this voice, "Get up and go." He's like, "What?
Mm.
Where?" You know, and he's not a young guy. And and uh and he's like, "Well, where?" "Well, where? I'll show you eventually." So what do you say to your family? You pack all your bags and you put them at the door and you say goodbye and they're like, "Where are you going there?" "I don't know."
Mhm.
You know, so this is a thing. This is the thing about when George is talking about following your conscience, right, and being obedient. And he does refer to it later on where he talks about it, you know, some people were sawn asunder,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, that's what I'm saying, like, they were sawn asunder. Some were made kings and some were sawn asunder.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Should we keep reading?
I think so. Such
I'm
a
trying
treasure trove.
I know, it really is. Um,
Authenticity versus integrity.
where were we?
Uh, oops, come on. I can't even say, look, because I don't know what the dictionary definitions are for those 2 words. My intuition would be no. I think authenticity would be a manifestation of your integrity, something like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I would
So,
think so too.
yeah. So we are at, but do not think that God is angry with you.
Yeah, I can start there.
Yeah, go for it.
But do not think that God is angry with you because you find it hard to believe. It is not so. That is not like God. God is all that you can honestly wish him to be and infinitely more. He is not angry with you for that. And he knows perfectly well what the scientific man calls truth. Although you will observe that he is always constantly and everywhere changing his theories. That what the scientific man calls truth is simply an impossibility with regard to God, and God knows it. Your brain, the symbol of your intellect, I love this, cannot concern, just like the, how do you come up with that? Your brain, the symbol of your intellect, cannot concerning him, if he exists, receive that kind of proof which
But you
you
have.
have when you read the propositions of Euclid. It commends itself to your mind and your understanding. You say, so it is, and it cannot be otherwise. But you cannot receive that kind of, there is no proof with regard to the mighty God. Sorry, I'm stumbling a little bit. And therefore I say, if you doubt the existence of the living God, he is not angry with you for that. But I am speaking of those who would fain believe if they could. I ask you, have you been trying the things not seen? Have you been proving them? This is what God puts in your hands. He says, I tell you, I am. You act upon that. For I know that your conscience moves in you. You act upon that, and you will find whether I am or not, and what I am. Do you see? Faith in its true sense does not belong to the intellect alone, nor to the intellect first, but to the conscience, to the will. And that man is a faithful man who says, I cannot prove that there is a God, but O God, if thou hearest me in anywhere, help me do thy will. There is faith. Do this, and he does it. It is, O friends, that is faith. It is doing that thing which you, let me say, even only suppose to be the will of God. For if you are wrong and do it because you think it is his will, he will set you right. It is the turning of the eye to the light. It is the sending of the feet into the path that is required, putting the hands to do the things which the conscience says ought to be done. You will notice that all the wait. You will notice that all this chapter for which I have taken the text is a list of people that did things. Some of them were made kings, and some of them were sawn asunder for it. But it was all for faith and nothing but faith. There was a truth. There was a live truth, a truth that had welled through and called the knowledge of the truth up in us. Nay, called up in us the very possibility of feeling truth. And according to this law, these men walked through all the world, and all the worlds together set themselves against them. And in the name of the original law of the universe, namely the living God, they walked right on and met their faith. Yes, victory in the participation of the divine nature. That was their faith.
Hmm.
I can keep going.
Well, let's wait. Let's talk about this because there's so much in here.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
I mean, I love that he says, God, don't think that God's angry with you because you find it hard to believe.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I mean, I used to think that like doubt was just the biggest, it was so problematic,
It
right?
was.
People were concerned about your soul immediately, and then you were going up for this, fifth altar call.
Oh my gosh. 500th.
My niece said to me one time, I don't know how many times I went up for the altar call. I can't believe it.
Well, for me, Sherry, can I share something with you? Because for me,
Yeah, I want to hear it.
it was very much like as soon as my definition of like something like grace changed, like the evolution of my understanding from like, okay, what this is what grace meant then, and now that I've I've lived a little bit more life and I've come into a new understanding of what grace is. That means that everything I understood grace to be prior was like false, and therefore my entire experience was false prior to this
Yeah.
new
Yeah.
understanding that I've come into. And so how could I have understood who God was with this faulty understanding of what grace was or love or whatever? I'm just picking
Right.
one of many. And so then yeah, altar call comes around and I'm the first guy with my hand up because
Got to be
I better
saved.
I need to rededicate my life to God because I didn't understand that definition.
Oh man, think about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So silly.
One thing I wanted to mention here, because George MacDonald is referencing science and men of science, and he's very critical, as all the people of that era, the Romantics, were of science. Um,
Hmm.
I wanted to just let everybody know that George MacDonald graduated from the University of Aberdeen in 1845 with a degree in chemistry and physics. Okay. Like, this is not a guy that's speaking out of his, mhm. Um, he spent the next several years struggling with matters of faith and deciding what to do with his life. His father could have pursued a career in the medical field, but he speculated that lack of money put an end to this prospect. It was only in 1848 that MacDonald began theological training at Highbury College for the congregational ministry. So, and I read an essay one time. This is a little off topic, but it's just interesting about George. I read an essay one time, and it was so interesting because a notos from Fantastes. Apparently, this is now I'm not going to get this right because I'm really bad at remembering these things, but has to do with electrical current. Like, the guy who wrote the essay was able to map the what do you call it? The properties, the dynamic properties of electricity and the routes that it follows right onto Fantastes. And I thought that would so be a George thing to do, because he talks about he talks about um, the world being the human being turned inside out, right?
Hmm.
And so he could use that. He could use, the principles of electricity or the laws of electricity to
Yeah.
actually build a story, a whole story. It was super interesting. I mean, I don't know how true it is, but it was
Yeah.
this guy's, you know, he just showed the parallels in the story. And yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was just fantastic. So when George MacDonald's talking about intellect and he's talking about science, he knows what he's talking about,
Yeah.
you know?
In yeah. I think I don't know how to talk about it because it'd probably be better to like tell a story or something. But when you like when he talks about foregoing the intellect in the act of faith, so like faith almost, I don't want to say it's a denial of the intellect because it's not, but it considers other factors before it consults the intellect. It's looking at the prompting inside of yourself from your conscience.
Well, that's why
And-
I gave the illustration of Abraham at the door with suitcases, and his family's like, "Where are you going?" He's like,
yeah.
"Doesn't sound very like, working from your intellect."
But also like but the intellect and the will, or the conscience and the will. So there's something to be said about him saying, like, I feel like when he brings in the will, what he's suggesting to a certain degree is that like it does not matter whether or not you believe this is possible, like in a scientific way. Like God can make this possible through the sheer like, okay, maybe.
Well, this gets back to what you were saying about Jordan Peterson saying we never know. If the person was rightly oriented,
Yeah.
right? We have no idea what they could actually do.
And it's not one's own will either, because that's what I was about to say. Like it's sheer willpower of the individual, but it's not sheer willpower of the individual. It's sheer
Well,
willpower
it's
of
about the orientation, like the
yeah.
orientation, right?
When
You're
your
striving
will
towards
conforms,
the thing. Yeah.
and when your will conforms with God's will,
Mhm.
like what is there to stop you?
Right. Well, the thing is, okay, so you know how John Vervaeke always talked about the how did he put it? He talked about when you pick up a cup, Like you reach for the cup and your hand just automatically shapes to the handle of the cup, right? Like you're not thinking about it. What does he call that?
Uh,
Matthew, you should know you're yeah, you are a John Vervaeke nerd. Anyway, I remember when he was explaining that one day, I was like, that is what conforming to the image is. Because you can't conform to the image if you aren't rightly oriented, right?
mhm,
And so, and you're talking about will,
mhm,
right? And so let's say this is the image and you're reaching towards it because you're oriented towards it. So that's the thing you're targeting, right? This is what Peterson talks about.
mhm,
Aiming, right? And so as you reach, you automatically conform to
mm,
it. You you literally become the shape of that thing.
yeah,
Just in the reaching for it. Think about that.
wow, yeah,
Yeah. So, and because like I said earlier, I really don't like the emulate Christ talk because people end up I don't I don't even know how to say it because they just end up trying to do things that look like things Jesus did. It's that remember that whole what would Jesus do thing, right?
mhm,
Which what if their conscience is telling them not to do that thing, Luke, that Jesus did,
sure.
right? Because there's a time for everything, right?
Yeah,
you know, like what if it's like, no, don't go walk on the water, not a good idea.
yeah,
Something like that. But if you're rightly oriented to God and you're reaching, you're targeting, you're aiming, right? Reaching for that thing, you are conforming to the image. You
yeah,
just automatically, without even thinking about it. This is what transformation is, you know? I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I have this question in the back of my head that I don't want to ask, but I'll do it anyways.
Are
Because
you
what's
afraid of doubt? Is it saying another
yeah,
altar call?
I've got doubts. I've got doubts. But um no, like what's the difference between this and like for instance like manifesting your future by positive thinking and orienting yourself around it, because there's a way in which these things do overlap, but I don't know if it's worth making a distinction here at all. And maybe I shouldn't even have said that. But in new age practice, you've got that, like, this way in which you can almost will your future into existence through sheer, like, yeah, sheer willpower. So I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out
Well, you know what my mother always said to me?
what.
Talking about willpower. She used to say, "Where there's a will, there's a way, eh, Sherry?" Because I was just like the most like just if I had something in my mind to do, I did it. Okay. And George MacDonald, he gets to this in here. Remember?
Hmm. He
He
does.
gets to it. And so yeah,
Maybe we
maybe
should.
we should just read it.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Do you want me to read? Do you want to read? Who's going to read?
I can keep reading. Therefore, friends, the practical thing is just this, and it is the one lesson that we have to learn, that whatever our doubt or difficulties, we must do the thing we know in order to learn the thing we do not know.
Okay, let's pause there.
Yeah. That's,
Like, how can you go wrong?
yeah, you can't.
Okay. Okay, keep going.
We must do the thing we know in order to learn the thing we do not know. But whatever we learn it, but whether we learn it or not, if ye know these things, saith the Master, happy are ye if you do them. It is in the
Mm.
doing, it is the doing that is everything, and the doing is faith, and there is no division between them. Then I would say a word to those who are further on. They have been trying to serve God for many years now. They do not seem to themselves to have made much of it. They find that they are still troubled in their soul, not whether they believe of God, but does he manage everything now? Where is he? I have never seen him. If he would but speak to myself. I have been crying for him for all these years, and I have never had a sign out of the great blank. Oh, if he would but show himself, if he would do something, give me the meanest sign that he actually is and that he cares about me. You say, I feel as if I could go on and on forever then. Friends, I believe there is no sign God could give you, but what you would begin to doubt again. I do not believe there is any miracle he could work before your eyes, even that by and by you would not begin to doubt and be just as lost as before. God will not give us little signs to spoil our appetite for great things. God will never be content until we are one with him and he is one with Christ. God will not give us signs and wonders in these inferior things. For be sure God's common and usual way is far better than his miraculous way, as we call it. If it were all miracle, we would make it all common. You may be sure then that God's usual way of doing things is the best way. I say he will not give us signs of anything outside to give us confidence in him. Nothing will serve God but this, that our faith in him shall be complete, go instantly with our perception of what he is. It is by the vision of our souls, the feeling and perception of our souls of what God is, that we are able to believe in him. Let man once see God as Christ saw him, and he believes. Let a man once see God as Christ saw him, and he believes. He does not see him perfectly, and his faith will never be absolutely complete until he comes to the point when he recognizes the character and being in relation of God to himself. And then he believes. And any glimmer of the truth in regard to our Lord's nature helps us to believe, enables us to go on and on and on, so that you see that the same thing that the intellect does with Euclid, the whole mind, heart, intellect, imagination, conscience, and will does with regard to God when a man sees God and knows him. The man says, I know enough to make a life grand and blessed and strong and a strong thing to me, and I am going on. We will see. I cannot convey to you, he may say, my conviction that will only come with the conviction itself. You must see, else you do not know. But life to me is enough. So would he say, but then, what is the way to this? You say, ah, friends, my friends, if you have been at it for 20 or 30 or 40 years, surely you have learnt by this time what you have just to go on doing. It is the hearkening to Christ and the doing his will. Let me try you a bit. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is your first thought in the morning? Is it God is life? Or is it how am I to order my day's work? Is it God is very rich and I am his child and he will see to me? Or is it how on earth shall I get through this that lies before me? Are you afraid? Are the cares of this world troublesome to you? Well, you have not gotten on much. But if you are not trying to suppress them, if you are not trying to get rid of them, I am afraid you have not gotten on at all. And if you have been 30 or 40 years trying to serve Christ, it has been a kind of service that he does not care much about. And it is no wonder that you that you do not and it is no wonder that you do not get on. You have been very careful reading your Bible and going to church and this thing and that thing that you think belongs to religion. But you have been doing but have you been doing the thing that Christ told you? If you do that, I do not care whether what else you do. You cannot be wrong then.
Okay, let's pause there again.
Yeah.
Are you doing the thing Christ told you? If you do that, I do not care whatever else you do. You cannot be wrong then. Okay, so this gets into that part that I was alluding to before. Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah. No, it gets into that integrity thing too, that like the belief that God is showing you the way, you know.
Mhm.
The same holds with you as with the beginner who is troubled as to whether there is a God or not. But you that believe in God do not trust him, whereas the other is not sure that there is a God, and you think it is very horrible of him to doubt the existence of God. And yet you, believing there is a God, are afraid of the trouble, the poverty, the opinion of the world, and are ambitious to get on this way or that. Oh, had almost sooner say that you do not believe in God and say that you believe than say that you believe in God. That you do not believe in God than say that you believe in God. And yet he is nothing to you. And when you feel inclined to say heavy and hard things about your atheistic neighbor, think that there may be a beam in your own eye, even worse, if you can bear to call it so, that the mote in if you can bear to call it so, then the mote in his. Indeed, friends, it is because our life does not shine that men have stood up and said there is no light.
Mm.
You see a man greedy and grasping, as much taken up with the things of this world as if he were to live. I will not say to the age of Methuselah, but to the age of 75 or 80. He works in the world as if he were to live forever in it. And sometimes I think the punishment that would fit him best would be to be condemned to live forever in the world. What a thing that would be! Ah, the man who is most sure that there is no God and that he can get on pretty well, he won't say the first rate, but pretty well without him. I think the better way would be to just let him live on and on and on until he got heartily sick of himself and hated himself and would gladly yield anything to get out of himself. Ah, friends, there is a worse thing than dying to never wake again. There is a worse thing than dying forever and going soul and brain to the dust, and that is to wake up to find that there is no God. That is the horror of horrors to me. But to tell me that I am to live forever and that there is no God? For anything any man knows who does not believe in a God, it may be so. He cannot tell with certainty that he is going to die forever because he sees no more than those that have gone before. Why should they not go on to some other sphere as they came into this one, without any warning or any choice? They do not they do not know until they find themselves here. Why should it why should it not be so in another state of existence? But to find yourself there with a God, there is no
Without a God.
oh, but
To
to find
find
yourself
yourself there without a God.
without a God. There is no use in praying to be killed because there is no God to hear your prayer. You can no more annihilate yourself than make yourself. The whole thing would be utter misery, especially when the man has such ideas that he is satisfied with himself. But what is to be done with you and me who cannot finish ourselves? Poor creatures. We feel that if God is like us, he had better cease, and we had better all cease. But if we see him, but
If
if
we
we,
see
but if we see he is like us, Only He is perfect, absolute in grandeur and loveliness. Ah, then, I shall get rid of this bad in me, this poor, mean stuff in me, and I shall become glorious, true, and excellent like Him. That is worth living for. Nothing else is. It is for that that Christ tells us to put confidence in Him and obey His word, and we shall see the Father. He that heareth and openeth the door, I will come in, sit down with him, and sup with him, and he with me. Then God is seated at the very fireside of our hearts. Then there is no more doubt. When God is seated at the very fireside of our hearts, then there is no more doubt. No more doubt. I say, friends, it is a good thing that you should have doubt until you see that there is nothing less that will do, and until you come to desire that, and to turn your judgments, your thoughts, your feeling in that direction. Oh, friends, I know nothing else in the world worth knowing. I could go on talking to you all day long about this, but I should weary you. Faith is the trying of things unseen, putting them to the test. And whatever your doubts, your fears, or your fears are, try them by obedience, and then you will get the help to carry you on. Less than that won't do. The darkness of life's closing time will come round about you and find you very doubtful, very sad, looking into the darkness and wondering, shall I wake or shall I sleep? But if you believe that man died and rose again, the whole thing is full of the dawn of an eternal morning, coming up beyond the hills of this life, and full of such hope as the highest imagination of the poet, as has not a glimmer as of yet. Sorry.
Okay. That was a lot.
There's a lot there.
Does anybody want to join us? Should I put the link back in the chat? How many people are watching?
Yeah.
I'll copy and paste again. Um,
Yeah, he finally gets to the obedience bit.
yeah, I mean, essentially what he says there is it doesn't matter about following your conscience. It matters to follow your conscience, and you'll learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you go.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is also intuition to me, right? The conscience.
Yeah.
Because, and I've said this before, it's like a muscle that you have to exercise in order to be able to use it reliably. So at some point you're going to have to fall flat, right? You're going to follow your intuition, and it's not going to be a good thing. It's going to be terrible. but how are you going to practice otherwise? Like,
Yeah.
like me, this is the thing that I'm always pushing back against when people start saying, well, you have to be careful about, because I'm like, yeah, but if you don't try, you don't do anything.
I know.
You literally are paralyzed by fear.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that fear? Ultimately, what is the fear? What is it the fear of? Hell.
Yeah.
That's what it's the fear of. So it's like, I don't know. I just want to always say, how much do we believe this shit?
Yeah.
Really? I don't know
Yeah.
how else to do it.
And how many times do we talk ourselves out of that like whatever it would be to like a prompting or whatever. I know I keep on bringing that up, but like you, I can only speak for myself in regards to like, okay, you have the, if you believe that God gives you, life and breath and everything else, like perhaps you believe that God's given you some passions and, and, um, you might begin to follow those things, but to step out, I mean, I think that's also stepping out into faith to a certain degree. Like I, um, I guess for me, anecdotally, it's like I remember, I've always loved gardening, and uh, that has been a way for me to connect with, the earth and also myself and connect with God um, but like at one point I had at this previous house that we had lived in, I had felt like I needed to grow food for other people. And there was this like impulse or prompt or whatever. And that's exactly what I began doing in that house and in that garden. And it grew and it flourished. And all it was just taking the first act, you know?
And you grew right out of it,
Yeah. And it was like, yeah, this is,
right? Like, you grew right out of it.
mhm.
Um,
And it was like, I couldn't even, I can look back with it, with like and retrospectively and I can see how things fell into place and I could compartmentalize it and suggest that it was all, uh I don't know, some act that I could explain it away, but I don't it's all I feel like that's
well, that's why he says earlier in the thing, like, if God gave us signs and wonders, we'd just doubt them anyways,
I know.
right? Because that's what you're doing.
I know. I
I
know.
had the privilege once, I think I told you about this, of when we lived in Switzerland, my daughter, when she was little, she said, "Mommy, draw me your dream, your dream. What is your dream, Mommy? Draw it for me." And I drew this log house and a little creek and a pile of wood and, windows and a door. And I don't know, it was like 20 years in living in this place that I was up at the homestead doing my chores. And like, we have an old homestead on our property.
Mhm.
There's an old log house up there. And and my husband had just felled a bunch of poplar trees that had died, and he stacked up the wood, and we have an old irrigation creek that ends up being like a little creek that flows in front of the house in the summer only, right? And in front of the old homestead house. And I, finished up my chores and I turned around, I was just looking around, and all of a sudden I was like, "Oh my God, this is my picture. This is my picture."
Yeah.
Like, this is exactly my picture.
That's what I drew.
And the picture was like, it wasn't really rational because the creek flowed too close to the house. I remember that. I remember thinking, well, that's kind of down my, could flood the house in the picture that I drew. But we actually have a little creek that flows really close to the house, but it's an irrigation ditch, right? In the
Mhm.
summertime. So it's like I'm in the middle of my dream for 20 some years.
Yeah.
And then God says, "Hoo hoo." Tap, 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 right?
You've arrived.
Just wanted to
After
show
a
you
long
that.
time.
Just want to remind you. You
Wow.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I like when he says, "What is your first thought in the morning? Is it God is life? Or is it," and I just wanna I just want to I'm sorry, Thomas. I haven't met you, and I'm sure you're a wonderful person, but this, our I just have to say this. What is your first thought in the morning? Is it God is life, or how do I drive out the money changers in the temple? Like, is this what we're doing? You know? I think that when we get up in the morning and we say God is life, we do drive out the money changers,
Mhm.
right? Like, there's no room for them in a place like that.
Mm.
Or we say God is very rich and I am his child and he will see to me. And then he says, or are you saying, how on earth shall I get through this that lies before me?
Mm.
And then he poses the question, are you afraid? No, Thomas, I know you're not contradicting me. I'm using your comments to point something out, and I hope I'm not making you feel badly, because that's not my intention. I understand the impulse to want to drive out, to want to, wage war with yourself, and we're not perfect, and we have things that we need to deal with in our lives.
Sure.
And I'm not telling you what mine are because they're shameful. Okay? But George says earlier up here, but do not think that God is angry with you because you find it hard to believe. Right? It is not so. That is not like God. God is all that you can honestly wish him to be, and infinitely more. And, one of the things, I'll just say it out loud here, like, one of the things that I would hope to accomplish in this space on YouTube, in these kinds of conversations like I'm having with Luke, is that we are hearing a more beautiful story. That's really, really what I wish, and it's also what motivates me to do these things and to say the things that I say, and to share the essays from George MacDonald and this sermon from George MacDonald, and talk about his fairy tales and read poetry, because we what is it he says there, Luke? See if I can find it. Maybe actually I can find that. He says, let the thing look to them as it may. It is a notion and a false idea of Christianity that has come into their minds. He's criticizing ideas of, actually, maybe I'll go back and read it just so for clarity's sake. Mm-hmm. When they look in their own hearts, even those who would fain rank themselves among believers, they recognize there an amount of doubt, difficulty, and fear that appalls them. What? Is the whole thing going to vanish like the baseless fabric of a vision? Like, this is why you ended up going up for altar calls, right? Because you were like, what? It's all going to vanish. I gotta get it back, right? Yeah. All this story of Christ, his life and death, and the conquests that were made in his name, is it all going out of sight? And are we to be left where the world was before he came? I should like to help some of you, if I can, friends, about all of this. It troubles some of your hearts, and some of you perhaps ought to be a little more troubled about it than you are, because it lies at your door in some measure. But I should like, if on the minds of young men particularly, if I could impress upon them that let the thing look to them as it may, it is a notion and a false idea of Christianity that has come into their minds, partly because their doors were opened narrow, partly because their aspirations were so low, partly because they have been so little in earnest for the truth it is about to vanish away and must perish.
Yeah.
But the true thing, God's notion of it, and what Christ thought and felt while he was here, what he thinks and feels now when he is here still, is that which shall never pass away, but is like the true fountain of truth and life to all the generations. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that point.
Carrie, I think we probably could finish this essay.
Okay, if you're up for it. I mean, it's late for you.
It is. There's just, we're like so close, and we got 3 paragraphs, and they're so
They're
good.
the best.
They're so good.
Should I read now?
Yeah.
Should I read?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, do you hope for anything, friends? Thank God that comes from your faith. No man has that has faith. Sorry. No man that has not faith can hope. But do not think the world is going all to the devil. There is a better and stronger faith coming. It
Mm,
was a great thing that this foolish, actionless kind of religion should vanish, and that a simple, obedient, hoping, trusting life should take its place. The world is not worse than it was. Many, even of those that do not believe in God, have faith toward their neighbor. Even those who do not believe on the whole are better in this century than those that did not believe in the last.
mm,
Only we are a set of foolish men and women who simply talk and nothing else, neither believe nor disbelieve, who have neither the soul nor the heart to be in earnest about anything. God has a hold upon them too, and he has but to place his hand upon them to make them feel it. But, friends, what we have to do is let our light shine. This is the best part. This is the best part, guys.
so good.
So, tune in, lean in. Do you get any light? Let it shine. I
Mm,
do not mean to be an example to other people. Okay. So there he's making my case.
yeah.
You know, don't go around trying to be an example, right? You have no business to set yourselves up as an example. You have to be and to do, and that is letting the light shine. It ought not to be possible to mistake a Christian for a man of the world. His very dealings with every man that comes near him have something to show, something that Christ would have done that a man of the world would not do. Tell me how you would like Christ to come in upon you at any moment in the midst of your business talk. Would you be ready to turn to him and say, Master, this is how I am saying the thing to my friend. This is how I see it in the light of thy love. Would you be ready for that? Or do you think that a great part of your being and your life can be conducted upon other laws than Christian? If a
Mm,
man does that, he is altogether wrong. Altogether wrong. Christ is God, the all in all, or nothing at all.
mm,
If we were as the bush, if every Christian were as the bush that burned with fire, that would be the shining of our light before men. Atheism would soon vanish. Unbelief would draw in its horns, reproved, judged, condemned by the very presence of faith. I would have you then, friends, remember that faith is the trying of the thing that you do not see and that you cannot be sure about. A thing that you do not see and which, not seeing, you have doubt about, you can yet try. That is faith. And if you are honest, that will be a great opportunity and a great help to you. It will start a fresh faith, which you have not thought of before,
mm,
and give your life a new start, which is what happened to Abraham, right?
yeah.
Faith is intended to put to the test the unseen world of truth, love, law, hope, redemption. God grant us all faith enough to carry on from point to point till the faith shall vanish into light, and we have never to think about faith more, nor to think about church more, nor the Bible more, nor prayer more, but our whole being shall be a delighted consciousness of the presence of God and his Christ. And that's it. We finished.
Amen.
I mean, we finished reading it.
My favorite, can I tell you my favorite
Yeah,
sentence in
I want to hear it.
the essay is faith is intended to put to the test the unseen world of truth, love, law, hope, redemption.
Yeah.
In it, how do I say why? Um, because those things are intangibles. Like they are not a part of the empirical world, of the scientific mind. It is, and I think that's what's hard is like you can talk about um, the virtue of hospitality, but it truly is like it's unseen. It can only be enacted. Like you can only experience it as a like as a sensory emotional experience when you walk into somebody's home and you experience hospitality through their through that experience. I guess I don't. Wendell Berry calls them intangibles, and he always talks about these things in as uh, uh, well, what does he say? He suggests that they're virtues, like faith, hope, and love as Christian virtues they're not. You cannot. You can see them in the world, but not in the same way that you can see them.
Well,
Like,
this is like this here. Shine, but not for example.
yeah,
Right? Um, it's like, and this gets right back to the very beginning. Like he's a good essayist, or a sermon guy. He wraps it right up, right?
so great.
Because he talks about, he says, if you have any hope, it comes from some faith in you. Hope, you may say, is a bud upon the plant of faith, a bud from the root of faith, and the flower is joy and peace.
Yeah.
And there's the shine. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes, like, it's all about light, right? Like,
Yeah.
the flower doesn't flower without light, right? So and then he goes on to say, further down, that if every Christian was shining like that,
Mm-hmm.
there would be no unbelief.
I
Could you
know.
imagine?
Yeah.
Everyone's just glowing in the dark, right? Um,
Well,
transfiguration, Luke.
yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how can you believe some of these things to be true in the world unless you are putting them to the test? Like how are you supposed to believe in love unless you are trying love? How are you
And
supposed
the thing is that they do it in, when he points to the, the great men of faith, he points out that they have to do it in adversity, right?
Yeah.
Some of them become kings and some are sawn asunder, and they have no idea where they're going. They just get up and they go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But I have to believe that they had glimpses throughout their lives of what those things were, even in their adversity.
Well, in my conversation with Wayne, I talked about dreams and visions and guidance.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I had was, how do I do this? Like, what is this going to be like? And I knew that that a lot of the ways that I thought about these things were going to make some people very unhappy, right? And I was thinking mostly of other Christians, actually, right?
Mhm.
And so anyway, I had a dream, and in the dream, I was on a street, and the street was like, from like, the whole street was filled with people, and they were all moving in the same direction, shoulder to shoulder, okay, tight, like little sardines, but they were all moving. And there were these big guys standing in these alcoves of the stores. It was like a downtown street, and they were standing there and they were watching, right? They were scanning the crowd. And I knew that they were looking for someone who wasn't, keeping up and marching along like everyone else.
Mhm.
And I heard this, "Psst, Sherry," right? And I look over, and there are these two angels, and they're standing in an alcove of a store where the thugs can't see them. And so I kind of, as nonchalantly as I can, I make my way over there and I pop into this alcove, and I'm hidden. And I'm like, what? Like, do you know how much trouble you could get me into? Like, what? And they said, you have to walk the other way. And I'm like, but then I'm like, no, they'll see me. And they said, we know. And then they said to me, we'll do what we can, but there's no guarantees. And I'm
Wow.
like, okay. And so I pushed into this crowd. I went back out on the road and I pushed and I had to push, right? And I was just like leaning in and I'm like, you know, and then all of a sudden I saw these thugs take notice of me. And then I woke up from my dream. And so like there were no illusions in my mind after that about what it was that God wants me to do. And I think George is saying the same thing when he points at these great men of faith who, despite all the adversarial, circumstances and
Yep.
people misunderstanding and even their own lack of knowledge, because God just told them to do something that they didn't know why, right? But they followed through. Like that takes a lot. That takes something, right? It's like I'm thinking right now about David and Saul when David has the opportunity to murder him. And he can't. He can't, not because God told him not to, but he can't because he can't bring himself to do it. He's holding on to something inside of him that will not give him permission to do that.
Yep.
Right. And it seems completely irrational because Saul's trying to kill him.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I never, like going back to that dream that I never had the impression that I was just to be contrarian. Like that wasn't the dream. That's not what the dream said. The dream said that whatever I was going to do, it was going to be against, it was going to be right. There was going to be pressures against me. And I think that is, what it means to be obedient to God. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. It's yeah. It's interesting, even how you were saying how he wraps it up in the end here, and he harkens back to the beginning when he says, "God grant us all the faith enough to carry on from point to point until faith shall vanish into the light." And we never have to think about faith more, or think about church more, nor God more, nor prayer more, but our whole being shall be a delighted consciousness of the presence of God and His Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking back to the plant as the root being faith, and the bud being hope, and the flower is joy and peace. And what more could characterize a delighted consciousness,
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know, it harkens back to we've talked before about the joy of the Lord being one's strength, and
Yeah.
you might be facing, it implies the fact that you would even need strength implies that there's some kind of resistance. There's a resistance that you need strength for, otherwise you wouldn't need the strength.
Yeah, and that's how plants grow, right? Like if it's not, they got to break through the ground, they got to handle the wind, and that's what as well as I do, that if you take nursery seedlings that aren't hardened off and plant them in the garden, you might as well just write them off, like just start over right now.
Yeah. Like you got to transition those puppies.
You got to give them strength.
Yeah.
And that strength comes through adversity.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that he makes the root itself as
hope.
Yeah.
Or no, faith. Faith is the
Faith is the
foundation,
root.
the root. Yeah. Hope is the
Which
bud.
hmm hope is the bud. But
Mhm.
yeah, faith being that like the stronger the root, like that tap root, the deeper it goes down, the more fortified you are, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you come to love dandelions like I have come to love dandelions?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I love
The most
dandelions.
underrated plant in the world.
You can throw them in your salad, eat them up.
Yeah, and you know what?
They're
They will
beautiful.
completely aerate your field for you,
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't
and they
know.
don't even ask for anything in return.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
Nothing. Yeah, and when
And
they're done, they go away. It's like we should actually make an animation of the march of the dandelions, right? They're just heading for the next compacted field.
yeah.
Work is done
Well,
here now. They could be like the little dwarfs from Snow White, you know? Hi ho, hi ho. It's off to where we go. That's what they're like.
they are, yeah. And the joy of picking one of the flowers after it's gone and created one of those beautiful little poof balls and
Yeah, and dandelion root, roasted dandelion root is
oh yeah.
it's like the best tea for your body, and it's a great substitute for coffee.
That's what I hear. I've not yet tried it, but
Yeah, I
yeah.
drink it all the time, but
No,
not because I'm off coffee. Believe me, I'm not. Like, I just drank
no,
one. I just drank a
no.
coffee.
No, I apologize. I have to say, we've got our little. She's almost 4 months old, so we've got a little 2-year-old and a little 4-month-old running, or 4-month-old. She's not running around, but I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off without
Yeah,
much sleep. But it's the best. It's the
yeah,
best.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you wake up in the morning, are you saying, "God is
Mhm.
rich,"
Yeah.
right? How does he put that? I just love that.
Oh yeah. Seriously, what did he say? Is your first thought in the morning? Is it God is life, or is
God's
it
life, yeah.
how am I to order my workday? Is it God is very rich and I am his child and he will see to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after that, you just whip your covers off and you're like, "What are we doing today?"
Mhm.
You know?
I wish it was every morning. Usually I gotta get that coffee in me. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I
but
guess everybody just watched and didn't join in. I
I
wish
know next time we
next
gotta pick another George MacDonald essay
Yeah,
or whatever. There's so many things to
we got stuff up our sleeve.
yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We'll talk more and we'll converge on another topic here on Grill Country soon.
Yeah, yeah. We can't get enough of George MacDonald. I would apologize to everybody, but I'm not going to because I think everyone should hear what he
Yeah.
has to say. And, he wasn't an essay writer. He wrote sermons. He
Yeah,
didn't
and it
write a lot of essays. We've done all the essays that I know of.
yeah,
But, there are a number of sermons we could tackle. We could try
and he
something.
has, even after the justice sermon, he has a sermon on light that I read just last week.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, yeah,
Yeah.
this was fun, Sherry.
Yeah, this is great. And,
I
I
can't
thank
believe we
everybody for watching.
how did we do a whole essay in one video call?
Yeah, we thought we were gonna have to break it up, but we just couldn't get enough. Well, it was kind of like watering from the top down, right? Like, so
Yeah,
all that stuff was trickling down to that beautiful ending, and just to leave it hanging, it was hard to do.
yeah, it was.
So,
Oh, man.
yeah. All right. Well, we'll sign off now, and we'll be back in some form or another.
And
And thank you, everybody, for watching.
yeah, we'll see you soon.